The call that changed everything. The rain hammered against Officer Michael Lawson's patrol car with a relentless ferocity, drowning out the hum of the engine as he navigated the deserted streets of Brooksville. The dim glow of streetlights flickered like dying fireflies, casting long shadows on the wet asphalt. Michael adjusted his rearview mirror out of habit, his reflection illuminated briefly by the sporadic flashes of lightning that painted the sky in jagged streaks. The static-laden voice of dispatch broke through the rhythmic drum of rain on the car roof. Unit 24, welfare check requested at 1517 Willow Creek Road, Apartment 7B. Neighbor reported crying children and loud noises. Caller is anonymous. Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened instinctively. Welfare checks were never easy, especially in the Willow Creek complex, a crumbling relic of urban neglect, known for its peeling paint, broken windows, and air thick with desperation. He glanced at his dashboard clock. 11:43 p.m. Nearly the end of his shift. Unit 24 responding. Michael replied, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his gut. As he turned onto Willow Creek Road, the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the torrential rain. His headlights caught glimpses of graffiti-tagged walls and overflowing dumpsters as he pulled into the complex parking lot. The building loomed before him, its weathered facade almost invisible against the storm's relentless darkness. Only a flickering porch light offered a hint of welcome, though it illuminated nothing but puddles gathering in potholes. Michael grabbed his flashlight, stepping out into the storm. Rain soaked through his uniform in seconds, chilling him to the bone. The air smelled of mildew and decay, with a faint hint of cigarette smoke lingering despite the downpour. As he ascended the concrete stairs, each creak of the steps seemed to echo louder than it should, the noise accompanied by the faint cry of a child from above. Reaching the second floor, he stopped in front of apartment 7B. The peeling door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind and revealing a sliver of darkness within. He knocked firmly, announcing his presence. Brooksville Police. Is anyone home? No response, save for the sound of soft sobbing inside. Michael pushed the door open cautiously, shining his flashlight into the gloom. The beam swept across the living room, revealing the chaos of a space long abandoned by hope. Torn curtains fluttered against the cracked windows, a broken coffee table lay on its side, and roaches scattered from piles of discarded fast food wrappers. But what caught Michael's attention was the pair of small figures huddled together on a stained mattress in the corner. Two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 7, clung to each other as though their very survival depended on it. The girl cradled a tattered stuffed bunny missing an ear, while the boy sat motionless, his tear-streaked face buried in his sister's shoulder. "Hey there," Michael said softly, lowering himself to one knee to appear less imposing. He kept his flashlight steady, its beam fixed on the ground rather than their faces. "I'm Officer Michael. You're safe now. Can you tell me your names?" The girl looked up first, her large, fearful eyes glistening in the dim light. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm Maya. This is my brother, Marcus." Michael's heart clenched as he noticed the way Marcus shrank further into his sister's side, his small hands clutching her arm, with a desperation Michael recognized all too well from years on the force. These weren't just scared kids. They were kids who had been failed, abandoned. "Are your parents here?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya shook her head, her lip quivering. "Mama left. She said she'd be back, but she didn't come back. It's been a long time." "How long, Maya?" Michael pressed gently, though dread twisted in his chest. Her small shoulders rose in a shrug. "I don't know. I just know it got dark a lot of times." Michael's stomach sank. He could tell from the state of the apartment, and the children, that they had been alone for days, maybe longer. He scanned the room again, noting the empty cupboards visible through the open kitchenette door and the bucket of murky water in the corner, likely their only source of hydration. "Okay," Michael said, his voice calm and steady as he reached for his radio. I'm going to get you both some help. But first, let's get you something to eat." He turned toward the door, his boots squelching against the damp carpet, but froze at Maya's sudden plea. "Don't let them take us away. Please." Her voice broke as she clutched Marcus tighter, her panic rising. "They'll separate us. I can't lose him." Michael knelt again, his throat tightening as memories of his own fractured childhood clawed their way to the surface. The cold steel of social workers' voices, the endless shuffling between homes that never felt like home, the aching emptiness of being torn from his younger sister, Grace. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with conviction. "I'll do everything I can to keep you together." He didn't know then what that promise would cost him. As he carried Marcus to his patrol car with Maya following close behind, the rain began to ease, leaving the streets glistening under the faint glow of distant streetlights. Yet in Michael's heart, a storm was just beginning, one that would unravel everything he thought he knew about sacrifice, redemption, and the power of keeping a promise. The cost of a promise. The clock ticked steadily on the wall of Michael Lawson's small kitchen as he pored over paperwork scattered across his table. It had been 2 days since he'd found Maya and Marcus, and his mind still churned with the weight of the decision he'd made that night. He had brought them to the station first, filling out the necessary reports and contacting Child Protective Services. But the look on Maya's face when she begged not to be separated from Marcus haunted him. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as he tried to figure out his next move. The CPS worker, Marlene Foster, had been polite but firm during their conversation. "We understand your concerns, Officer Lawson," she'd said, her tone clipped, as if she were reading from a script. "But finding a foster home that will take siblings, especially in an emergency situation, is complicated. It's unlikely we can place them together." Unlikely. That word gnawed at him. He'd seen unlikely turn into reality far too many times. Siblings ripped apart because the system couldn't, or wouldn't, accommodate them. Michael clenched his fists, the memory of Maya's tear-streaked face vivid in his mind. He couldn't let that happen to them. His phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years. Grace Lawson. He hesitated, the knot in his chest tightening. They hadn't spoken much since their mother's funeral 5 years earlier, their relationship strained by years of distance and unresolved wounds. Finally, he swiped to answer. "Hey, Grace." There was a pause just long enough to make him wonder if she regretted calling. "Hey, Michael," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. "I saw the news. Is it true? Did you really find those kids in Willow Creek?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, 2 of them. Siblings. They've been through hell." "You've always had a soft spot for kids like that," Grace said, her tone tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Are you okay?" He hesitated, unsure how to answer. Was he okay? He'd spent the last 48 hours racking his brain for a solution, knowing full well that his actions might cost him everything. "I'm managing," he said finally, though it felt like a lie. "Michael," Grace said, her voice firm now, "don't do anything stupid." The words stung, though he knew she meant well. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," he said dryly. "I'm serious," she pressed. "You've worked hard to get where you are. Don't throw it all away. Not again." He bristled at the unspoken reference to his past. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just trying to do the right thing." "Just be careful, okay?" Grace said, the tension in her voice softening. "And call me if you need anything." As the line went dead, Michael sat in silence, the weight of Grace's words settling over him. He knew she was right. He had worked hard to rebuild his life after the mistakes of his youth. But as he thought of Maya and Marcus, curled up on the worn couch in the temporary housing he'd arranged for them, he couldn't shake the feeling that protecting them was more important than anything else. The next morning, Michael stood outside Pastor Elijah Grant's small community center, a modest building with chipped paint, but an air of warmth and welcome. The pastor had been a pillar of Brooksville for decades, known for his work with at-risk youth and families. If anyone could help, it was him. "Michael," Pastor Grant greeted warmly, clasping Michael's hand in both of his. "It's been too long. What brings you here?" Michael hesitated, then launched into the story. He told the pastor about finding Maya and Marcus, about their fear of being separated, about the broken system that seemed destined to fail them. "I need your help," Michael said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "They need a place to stay, a safe place where they can be together." The pastor's kind eyes narrowed in thought. "That's a tall order, Michael. You know how the system works. CPS isn't going to just hand over custody to anyone without a fight." "I know," Michael said, "but if you could vouch for them, for me, it might buy us some time. Please, Pastor." I promised them I'd keep them together. Pastor Grant studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can, but you need to be prepared for the consequences. This kind of thing, it doesn't come without risks." "I'll handle it," Michael said firmly. "I just need to know they're safe." By the time Michael returned to the station that afternoon, the air was thick with tension. Word had spread about his actions, and while some of his colleagues offered quiet support, others weren't so understanding. "You're playing with fire, Lawson," Detective Harris muttered as Michael passed his desk. "CPS doesn't like it when cops overstep." Michael didn't respond, though the words gnawed at him. He knew he was walking a fine line. But as he checked in with Marlene Foster to finalize the temporary placement with Pastor Grant, he couldn't bring himself to care. "Pastor Grant has agreed to take them in," Michael said, handing Marlene the necessary paperwork. "They'll be together, and he's got the resources to care for them." Marlene frowned, her pen tapping against the edge of her clipboard. "You're lucky Pastor Grant has a spotless record. But this is only temporary, Lawson. We'll be reviewing this arrangement closely." Michael nodded, keeping his expression neutral even as relief flooded through him. For now, Maya and Marcus would stay together. For now, he kept his promise. That evening, Michael visited the community center to check on the kids. Maya greeted him with a shy smile, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized hoodie she wore. Marcus lingered behind her, his dark eyes watching Michael warily. "Are we going to stay here forever?" Maya asked, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly. Michael knelt to her level, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "I don't know about forever," he admitted. "But for now, this is your home. Pastor Grant will take good care of you." Maya nodded, her lip trembling. "Thank you, Officer Michael, for everything." As Michael drove home that night, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. But deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. Keeping his promise had come with a cost, one that he was only beginning to understand. The cracks began to show. Michael Lawson awoke to the shrill ring of his phone, his body tense even before he opened his eyes. The glow of early morning sunlight crept through the blinds of his small apartment, but the unease he'd been carrying since he found Maya and Marcus kept him from appreciating the peace of the hour. He grabbed the phone, his voice groggy. "Lawson. Officer Lawson, this is Marlene Foster." Her clipped tone brought him fully awake. "We need to talk. There's been a development." Michael sat up, his heart pounding. What kind of development? It seems Pastor Grant's temporary guardianship is being contested by the children's biological mother. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Their mother? She abandoned them. Marlene sighed audibly. She's claiming she was forced to leave due to an abusive partner and intends to regain custody. CPS will be investigating her claims. Michael's jaw clenched. "You've seen those kids, Marlene. They've been living in squalor for weeks. You think a few words from her should outweigh that?" "It's not my decision, Lawson," she snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. "The system is designed to prioritize reunification with biological parents whenever possible." Michael hung up, feeling the familiar frustration rise. The system had failed countless children he'd encountered during his career, and now it seemed determined to fail Maya and Marcus. He couldn't let that happen. Michael found himself back at Pastor Grant's community center later that day. The warm aroma of coffee and baked goods greeted him as he entered, but it did little to soothe his frayed nerves. Pastor Grant sat at a table in the corner, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. His expression was calm but weary, the kind of weariness that came from fighting too many uphill battles. "They told me about the mother," Pastor Grant said before Michael could even sit down. "She's filed the paperwork." Michael sank into the chair opposite him. "Do you think there's any chance her story is true?" The pastor tapped a pen thoughtfully against the table. "I don't know. But whether it's true or not, CPS will give her the benefit of the doubt. The courts tend to side with parents unless there's undeniable evidence of neglect or abuse." "They were starving, Pastor," Michael said, his voice rising. "What more evidence do they need?" Pastor Grant held up a calming hand. "I know, Michael. Believe me, I know. But this isn't about what's right. It's about what the law says. And the law doesn't always protect children the way it should." Michael leaned back, running a hand over his face. "So what do we do?" "For now, we wait," the pastor said, though his tone made it clear he hated the idea as much as Michael did. That evening, Michael visited Maya and Marcus in their small room at the community center. Maya was seated on the floor, drawing with a set of crayons someone had donated, while Marcus sat on the bed, staring out the window with a blank expression. "Hey, kiddos," Michael said, crouching down beside Maya. "What are you drawing?" She held up the paper, a colorful picture of two stick figures, holding hands in front of a bright yellow sun. "This is me and Marcus," she said proudly. "We're at the beach. Mama always said she'd take us to the beach someday, but she never did." Michael's heart tightened. "It's a beautiful drawing, Maya. Maybe one day you and Marcus can go to the beach for real." Marcus turned toward him then, his dark eyes intense. "Is Mama coming back for us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael hesitated, unsure how to answer. "She's trying, Marcus," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean you have to go back if it's not safe. Pastor Grant and I are here to make sure you're okay." Marcus nodded slowly, though his expression remained guarded. Michael wondered how much trust the boy could afford to give, after all he'd been through. The next week brought a flurry of meetings, hearings, and tension. Michael was called into the station twice for questioning about his involvement in the case. Each time, he defended his actions with unwavering resolve, though he knew he was walking a dangerous line. "You're putting your career on the line for these kids," Detective Harris warned him after the second meeting. "Are you sure it's worth it?" Michael didn't hesitate. Yes. But the strain was beginning to show. His coworkers were keeping their distance, their usual camaraderie replaced by cautious whispers. Even Grace, who had been checking in more frequently since their last conversation, voiced her concerns. "You can't save everyone, Michael," she said during a late-night phone call. "You have to take care of yourself, too." "I can't walk away, Grace," he replied. "Not from them." The final hearing to determine Maya and Marcus's future was set for a Friday morning. Michael arrived at the courthouse early, his stomach churning with anxiety. He'd barely slept the night before, replaying every possible outcome in his mind. Pastor Grant joined him in the hallway, a reassuring presence amid the chaos. "No matter what happens in there, Michael," the pastor said quietly, "you did everything you could for those kids. Remember that." Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Maya and Marcus sat with a CPS worker near the front, their small frames dwarfed by the wooden benches. Their mother, a thin woman with hollow eyes, sat on the opposite side, flanked by her attorney. Michael watched as the proceedings unfolded, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. The mother's attorney painted a picture of a woman who had been a victim of circumstance, forced to leave her children to protect them from an abusive partner. The CPS worker testified about the neglect they'd found in the apartment, but the mother's attorney argued that the conditions were a result of her struggles, not her intent. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he stood with a mix of determination and dread. He recounted the night he found Maya and Marcus, describing their fear, their hunger, their desperation. "These kids don't just need a roof over their heads," he said, his voice steady despite the tightness in his throat. "They need stability, safety, and love. They've already been through so much. Sending them back to an unstable environment would destroy them." His words hung in the air long after he sat down, the courtroom falling into a heavy silence. The judge's decision came after what felt like an eternity. The mother would retain supervised visitation rights, but custody was awarded to Pastor Grant for the foreseeable future. Relief washed over Michael as he heard the verdict, but it was bittersweet. He knew the fight wasn't truly over. The mother could appeal, and CPS would continue to monitor the situation closely. As he stepped out of the courthouse, Maya ran to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "Thank you, Officer Michael," she whispered, her voice muffled against his jacket. Marcus stood a few steps behind, his expression unreadable. But when Michael met his gaze, the boy gave him a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Michael knelt to their level, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "You're safe now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure it stays that way." As he walked them to Pastor Grant's car, the weight of everything he'd done, and everything he still had to do, pressed heavily on him. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. A fragile piece. The weeks following the custody hearing passed in a blur of cautious optimism and quiet resilience. Maya and Marcus settled into life at Pastor Grant's community center, a safe haven that offered them warmth, stability, and a semblance of normalcy. But for Michael Lawson, the battle was far from over. Though the court had ruled in the children's favor, the looming presence of their mother's visitation rights cast a shadow over their newfound peace. Michael found himself spending more time at the community center than he'd originally planned. At first, he told himself he was just checking in, ensuring the kids were adjusting well. But deep down, he knew he was drawn there for more than duty. Each visit with Maya and Marcus chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself, stirring feelings he hadn't allowed himself to confront in years. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michael arrived at the community center to find Maya sitting cross-legged on the front steps, her tattered stuffed bunny clutched in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her face breaking into a shy smile. "Hey, Officer Michael," she said, the nickname sticking despite his repeated attempts to convince her to just call him Michael. "You're early today." Michael chuckled, ruffling her hair as he sat down beside her. "Thought I'd see what you were up to." "Where's Marcus?" She pointed toward the small soccer field behind the center, where a group of kids were chasing a ball under the watchful eye of a volunteer. Marcus stood on the sidelines, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "He doesn't play much," Maya said, her voice soft. "He says it's because he doesn't like soccer, but I think it's because he doesn't want anyone to see him lose." Michael nodded, watching the boy who had grown so quiet and guarded since the night they met. "He's been through a lot," he said gently. "Sometimes it takes time to trust people again." Maya hugged her bunny closer, her eyes fixed on the field. "Do you think Mama really wants to see us?" Michael hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I think she's trying to figure things out, Maya," he said finally. "But no matter what happens, you and Marcus are going to be okay. Pastor Grant is here for you, and so am I." The reassurance seemed to ease her tension, and she leaned her head against his arm. "I hope so." Inside the community center, Pastor Grant was preparing for a fundraiser event scheduled for the following weekend. The dining hall had been transformed into a makeshift workshop, with tables piled high with crafts, baked goods, and handmade signs advertising the event. "We've got a good turnout this year," the pastor said as Michael helped him hang a banner over the entrance. "A lot of folks in the community want to help the kids. It's heartening to see." Michael nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "Do you think their mom will show up to her first visitation?" Pastor Grant sighed, lowering his voice to avoid being overheard. "It's hard to say. If she's serious about getting her life together, she'll be here. But if she's not—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Either way, we'll be ready." The idea of the mother re-entering the children's lives filled Michael with unease. He didn't want to believe she could truly change, not after what he'd seen in that apartment, but he also knew that people could surprise you, sometimes in ways you least expected. The first supervised visit took place on a gray Saturday morning in the community center's counseling room, a small, sparsely decorated space that felt more like a waiting room than a place for emotional reunions. Michael stood just outside the door, his arms crossed as he listened to the muffled voices inside. Maya's voice was tentative, her words cautious and polite. Marcus, however, remained silent, his presence marked only by the occasional shuffle of his chair. Their mother, Vanessa, spoke with a mix of nervousness and desperation, her words tumbling out as though she were trying to make up for lost time. "I missed you both so much," Vanessa said, her voice cracking. "I've been working hard to fix things. I'm staying with a friend now, and I'm looking for a job. I'm doing this for you." Michael's jaw tightened as he listened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the scars Maya and Marcus carried, both visible and invisible, told a different story. The visit ended after an hour, and as the door opened, Michael saw Maya clutching her bunny tightly, her expression conflicted. Marcus walked past him without a word, his shoulders hunched as though he were carrying the weight of the world. Vanessa lingered in the doorway, her eyes meeting Michael's for the briefest of moments. "Thank you for looking after them," she said quietly. Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. That evening, Michael found Marcus sitting alone in the community center's library, a small room filled with donated books and mismatched furniture. The boy was flipping through a comic book, though his eyes seemed unfocused. "Mind if I join you?" Michael asked, pulling up a chair. Marcus shrugged, his gaze still on the book. "Whatever." Michael leaned back, giving the boy space. "How was the visit?" Marcus didn't answer at first, his fingers idly tracing the edge of the page. Finally, he looked up, his dark eyes meeting Michael's. "She says she's trying to fix things," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what if she doesn't? What if she leaves again?" Michael's chest tightened at the raw vulnerability in the boy's voice. "I can't promise what she'll do, Marcus," he said honestly. "But I can promise this. You and Maya won't ever have to go through this alone. You've got people who care about you, Pastor Grant, Maya, and me. We're not going anywhere." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the fundraiser approached, Michael threw himself into helping Pastor Grant with the preparations. He painted signs, arranged tables, and even convinced a few of his former colleagues to donate supplies. The event became a welcome distraction from the tension surrounding Vanessa's visits, which continued to be strained and emotionally charged. On the day of the fundraiser, the community center buzzed with activity. Families browsed the tables of crafts and baked goods, children played games on the lawn, and volunteers worked tirelessly to keep everything running smoothly. Maya and Marcus stayed close to Michael, their laughter a rare but welcome sound amid the chaos. For a brief moment, it felt like things might actually be okay. But as the sun began to set, Michael spotted Vanessa standing at the edge of the crowd, her presence a stark reminder of the uncertainty that still loomed. She didn't approach, didn't speak to anyone, just watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. Michael's chest tightened as he glanced at Maya and Marcus, who were oblivious to their mother's presence. He knew this fragile peace couldn't last forever, but for now, he was determined to protect it, for them, and for himself. Storms of the past. The weeks after the fundraiser felt like the calm before an inevitable storm. The community center bustled with activity, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Michael Lawson could sense it in the way Marcus withdrew further into himself after each supervised visit with their mother. He saw it in Maya's forced smiles, her quiet moments of staring out the window clutching her stuffed bunny. He felt it in his own chest, a weight that seemed to grow heavier with every passing day. Michael had spent countless nights replaying the decisions that had brought him here. Every sacrifice, every risk. It all boiled down to this fragile moment. He had promised to protect Maya and Marcus, but the cracks in their world were widening, and Michael feared he couldn't hold everything together. One cold November afternoon, Michael sat in Pastor Grant's office, the warmth of the space contrasting sharply with the chill in his bones. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched on the desk between them. Pastor Grant leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped as he regarded Michael with a concerned expression. "The visits are taking a toll," the pastor said gently. "You've seen it yourself. Marcus is shutting down, and Maya, well, she's trying to hold it together, but she's just a child." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, but what can we do? The court ruled for supervised visitation, and Vanessa hasn't violated any terms. Legally, she's within her rights." Pastor Grant sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Legally, yes, but emotionally, those kids are caught in a tug-of-war, and they're the ones paying the price." The pastor's words hung heavy in the air. Michael rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "She says she's changed," he said, though his tone betrayed his skepticism. "She says she wants to be better for them." "Do you believe her?" Pastor Grant asked, his gaze steady. Michael hesitated, the question forcing him to confront a truth he'd been avoiding. "I want to," he admitted finally, "but I don't know if I can." That evening, Michael decided to take Maya and Marcus out for a rare treat, a trip to the local diner. The small restaurant, with its checkered floors and jukebox in the corner, was a place Michael had frequented in his younger days. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming, a perfect escape from the weight of their everyday struggles. Maya's face lit up when she saw the menu. "Can I get pancakes for dinner?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Absolutely," Michael said with a grin. "Get as many as you want." Marcus, however, sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the table. When the waitress came to take their order, he mumbled something about just wanting fries. Michael frowned but decided not to press him. Instead, he focused on making Maya laugh, telling her stories about his rookie days on the force and the ridiculous situations he found himself in. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like they were just three people sharing a meal, unburdened by the weight of the past. But as they left the diner, stepping out into the crisp night air, the fragile peace shattered. Vanessa was waiting by Michael's car, her arms crossed and her expression taut with emotion. "Vanessa," Michael said, his voice sharp with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see them," she said, her voice trembling. "I couldn't wait until the next visit." "This isn't how it works," Michael replied, stepping in front of Maya and Marcus instinctively. "You're supposed to go through CPS. I'm their mother." Vanessa's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "Don't I have a right to see my own kids?" Before Michael could respond, Marcus stepped forward, his small frame rigid with anger. "You left us," he said, his voice shaking. "You said you'd come back, but you didn't. You left us in that place, with no food, no nothing." Tears streamed down Vanessa's face as she reached out to him. "I didn't want to leave you," she said, her voice breaking. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect us?" Marcus's voice cracked as he yelled. "You didn't protect us. You left us alone." Michael placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his heart breaking at the raw pain in the boy's voice. "That's enough," he said gently. "Let's go." Vanessa didn't follow as Michael ushered the kids into the car, but her sobs echoed in the quiet street, haunting him long after they drove away. That night, Michael sat in his apartment, staring at the photo of his younger self and Grace that he kept on the mantel. It had been taken before everything fell apart, before their mother's addiction, and their father's abandonment had shattered their family. He remembered the nights he'd stayed up comforting Grace, promising her that things would get better. He remembered the pain of breaking those promises when they were sent to separate foster homes. He thought about Marcus and Maya, about the anger and hurt in Marcus's voice, and about Vanessa's tears. The parallels to his own childhood were too close for comfort. He grabbed his phone and dialed Grace's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy from sleep. "Michael, what's going on?" "I messed up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to do the right thing, but I don't know if I'm making things worse for them." Grace was silent for a moment, then said softly, "You're doing what you can, Michael. That's all anyone can ask." "It doesn't feel like enough," he admitted. "Sometimes it won't," she said, "but you keep trying anyway. That's what matters." The next day, Michael arrived at the community center to find Pastor Grant waiting for him with a grim expression. "We need to talk," the pastor said, leading Michael into his office. "Vanessa has filed a petition for full custody." Michael sank into a chair, his stomach dropping. "How is that even possible?" "She's claiming she's turned her life around," the pastor explained. "She's completed a parenting course, has a stable place to live, and even has a part-time job. The court will take all of that into account." Michael shook his head, anger and frustration boiling over. "And what about the kids? What about what they've been through? Doesn't that matter?" "It does," Pastor Grant said gently. "But the court will weigh all the evidence. And right now, Vanessa's making a strong case." Michael left the office feeling defeated. As he walked past the recreation room, he spotted Maya and Marcus playing a board game with some of the other kids. They were laughing, but the sound felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. He had to find a way to fight for them. He just didn't know how. The ties that bind. The courthouse was crowded, the echo of hushed conversations and shuffling papers filling the air. Michael Lawson sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Across the hall, Vanessa paced nervously, occasionally glancing toward the door. Maya and Marcus were with Pastor Grant in a separate room, shielded from the tension that hung heavy in the air. Michael's stomach churned as he replayed everything he wanted to say. He had testified in hearings before, but this was different. This wasn't about arrests or evidence. This was about two children who had become a part of his heart. When the courtroom doors opened, Michael took a deep breath and stepped inside. The proceedings began with Vanessa's attorney painting a picture of redemption. They presented evidence of her parenting course completion, her new job, and testimonials from friends vouching for her progress. Vanessa sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap as she wiped away tears. "I love my kids," she said, her voice trembling. "I made mistakes, but I've worked hard to fix them. All I want is a chance to be their mom again." Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she could provide the life Maya and Marcus deserved. But doubt lingered, fueled by the memory of finding them huddled together in that apartment. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he rose and adjusted his tie, his heart pounding. He met the judge's gaze, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I'm not here to tear Vanessa down," he began. "I believe she loves her children. But love isn't enough. Maya and Marcus need stability. They need to heal." He described the night he found them, their fear and hunger, the emptiness in their eyes. He spoke about Marcus's anger and Maya's desperate attempts to stay strong for her brother. "These kids have been through things no child should ever experience," he said, his voice thick. "They deserve to feel safe. They deserve to know they won't be abandoned again." After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge called for a recess. Michael stepped outside, his breath fogging in the chilly afternoon air. He leaned against the courthouse wall, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "You did everything you could," Pastor Grant said, joining him. "No matter what happens, you've been there for them when they needed it most." Michael nodded, though the words offered little comfort. "I just want them to be okay." "They will be," the pastor said, "because they have people who love them." When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. Michael held his breath as the judge began to read the ruling. While the court recognizes Ms. Rivera's efforts to rebuild her life, we also cannot ignore the trauma experienced by the children and their need for ongoing stability. Therefore, primary custody will remain with Pastor Elijah Grant, with supervised visitation for Ms. Rivera. Relief flooded Michael, but it was tempered by the sight of Vanessa breaking down in tears. As much as he had fought for Maya and Marcus, he couldn't deny the pain of a mother who had lost her children. Again. The ride back to the community center was quiet. Maya and Marcus sat in the back seat, their hands clasped tightly together. Michael glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and determination. When they arrived, the kids ran inside to join the other children in the recreation room. Michael lingered in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe as he watched them laugh and play. For the first time in weeks, they seemed at ease. "You're a good man, Michael," Pastor Grant said, stepping beside him. "You've given those kids something no one else could hope." Michael shook his head. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," the pastor said firmly. "You did what most wouldn't." In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Maya and Marcus flourished under Pastor Grant's care, their laughter becoming more frequent, their smiles more genuine. Michael visited often, helping with homework, playing board games, and simply being present. One evening, as Michael was getting ready to leave, Marcus stopped him at the door. The boy held out a small, folded piece of paper, his face serious. "What's this?" Michael asked, unfolding it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures, Maya, Marcus, and Michael standing together under a bright yellow sun. Above them, in wobbly letters, were the words, "Our family." Michael's throat tightened as he knelt down, pulling Marcus into a hug. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Months later, during a quiet afternoon at the community center, Michael sat with Grace at a table, sipping coffee as they watched Maya and Marcus play outside. "You did good, Michael," Grace said, her voice filled with pride. "You gave them a chance." Michael nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think they gave me a chance too." For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. He had lost much in his life: his family, his career, his sense of purpose. But in the laughter of 2 children, he had found something he never thought he'd have again: a reason to believe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in a warm golden glow, Michael felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by the promise of a brighter future, for Maya and Marcus, and for himself. The days following the custody ruling were a mix of relief and cautious optimism. Vanessa had not contested the decision, at least not immediately, but her presence still lingered in the edges of their lives. Each time she appeared for supervised visits, the air seemed to tighten, Marcus stiffened, and Maya retreated into her quiet thoughts. Michael could see the toll it was taking on them. They were thriving in many ways. Maya's drawings were brighter, her laughter more frequent. Marcus had joined a soccer program and was starting to make friends. But the shadow of their mother's visits, the uncertainty of her place in their lives, kept them from fully embracing the peace they had found. One afternoon, during a rare moment of quiet at the community center, Marcus approached Michael, his expression serious. The boy clutched a folded piece of paper, much like the one he'd given Michael months earlier. "Can you come with me?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but soft. Michael followed him to a quiet corner of the community center's library. Marcus handed him the paper without a word. Michael unfolded it carefully, revealing another drawing. This one was simpler, just 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing side by side. Above them, in bold, uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you, Dad." Michael's breath caught. He looked down at Marcus, who was staring at the floor, his small hands clenched into fists. "I know you're not my real dad," Marcus said quickly, his words tumbling over one another. "But you feel like one. And I just I wanted you to know." For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. He knelt down, placing his hands gently on Marcus's shoulders. "Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you and Maya are family to me. You always will be. And I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." Marcus looked up then, his eyes shining with unused tears. "You won't leave, right? You'll stay." Michael pulled him into a hug, his own tears spilling over. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "I promise." A few weeks later, the community center held a small celebration for Maya's 9th birthday. The dining hall was filled with balloons and streamers, the tables piled high with cupcakes and snacks. Maya was surrounded by friends, her face glowing with happiness as she opened presents and played games. Vanessa had been invited, but she hadn't shown up. Michael caught Maya glancing at the door a few times, her smile faltering just slightly each time. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that it didn't matter, but he knew better. No matter how much Vanessa had hurt her, Maya still held on to the hope that her mother might change. When the party wound down, Maya approached Michael, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm and a small cupcake in her hand. "Did you have fun, birthday girl?" Michael asked, ruffling her hair. She nodded, then looked up at him with wide, searching eyes. "Do you think Mama will ever come back for real?" Michael crouched down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "I think she's trying, Maya. But even if she doesn't, you'll always have people who love you. Me, Pastor Grant, Marcus. We're not going anywhere." Maya's lip quivered, but she smiled. "Okay." As winter approached, Michael began spending more time at the community center. It had become his sanctuary, a place where he felt connected, needed. One evening, as he helped Pastor Grant sort through donations, the older man spoke up. "You've found your purpose here, haven't you?" The pastor said, his tone warm. Michael paused, considering the question. "I think I have," he admitted. "It's not the life I planned, but it feels right." Pastor Grant smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You know, we could use someone like you here full-time. You've got a gift for connecting with these kids, for giving them hope. It's not police work, but it's just as important." Michael stared at him, the weight of the offer settling over him. Could he really leave behind his old life for good? Could he find fulfillment in this new role, this new purpose? As he watched Maya and Marcus playing in the yard outside, their laughter ringing out against the crisp evening air, he realized he already knew the answer. Months turned into years. Vanessa's visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Maya and Marcus continued to thrive, their bond with Michael growing stronger with each passing day. He officially became a mentor at the community center, dedicating his days to helping kids who had faced struggles similar to those of Maya and Marcus. One summer evening, as they sat together on the front steps of the community center, Marcus turned to Michael with a grin. "You're stuck with us now, you know what," he said, his tone teasing but filled with warmth. Michael chuckled, wrapping an arm around Marcus's shoulders. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Maya leaned against his other side, her stuffed bunny still tucked under her arm. "You're the best dad ever," she said softly, her voice filled with the kind of trust and love Michael never thought he'd hear again. As the sun set, casting the yard in a warm golden glow, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had lost so much in his life, but he had found something far more meaningful: a family, a purpose, and a chance to rewrite the story of his own broken childhood. And as he sat there with Maya and Marcus, their laughter filling the air, he knew that he had kept his promise, one that had cost him everything, but had given him so much more in return.